The human ambassador slammed his fist on the podium and shouted, "If the Soleil ships don't turn around right now, Earth will go to war to defend our territory." Charles Allen was the picture of human defiance, staring down the insectoid ambassador with fire in his eyes. The Soleil had gone too far this time, violating the Treaty of Proxima, trespassing in Sol space, sabotaging human defenses. Now they threatened humanity's very existence as a free species. The United Nations chamber erupted into chaos, a dozen alien races shouting or chirping or growling in a cacophony of outrage. The Soleil ambassador Talon stood, his multifaceted eyes glittering with malice, serrated mandibles clicking out a harsh ultimatum. The Soleil Empire does not recognize your primitive species' claim to the Sol system. Submit to our rule or be destroyed. A tense hush fell over the room. The human ambassador's reply would determine the fate of human civilization, subjugation, or galactic war. Earth had only achieved faster-than-light travel a scant few decades ago, while the ancient Soleil Empire commanded a vast armada that dwarfed humanity's fledgling space fleet. But Charles had an ace up his sleeve, recordings of Soleil warships blasting apart defenseless human civilian transports. Talon's threat of war was hollow. The Soleil had already declared it with their cowardly attacks on unarmed ships. Charles played the damning footage, sending a ripple of shock through the assembly. The Soleil would pay for their crimes against humanity, one way or another. Reparations and withdrawal, or all-out war. The choice was theirs. But humanity would never again let hostile aliens set foot on sacred Earth soil. Charles made that promise in front of the entire galaxy, staking humanity's survival on his defiant stand. Light years away from Earth, on the Soleil homeworld, Talon knelt before the Soleil Empress in her grand throne room. Shadows draped the chamber, barely held at bay by dim, flickering lights. Towering columns lined the hall, each adorned with intricate carvings depicting the Soleil's many conquests over lesser species. The Empress herself, a massive insectoid with iridescent green scales and cold, calculating eyes, perched upon her throne, listening as Talon recounted the events that had transpired at the Galactic Council. The human ambassador Charles Allen dared to issue an ultimatum to the Soleil Empire, Talon said, his head bowed in submission, his voice trembling slightly. He demands that we withdraw our forces from their system and pay reparations or face war. The Empress hissed, her mandibles clicking together in irritation, the sound echoing through the cavernous room. The arrogance of these humans knows no bounds. She spat, her multifaceted eyes glinting with malice. They are like insects buzzing at the feet of giants. We will swat them aside and claim their world as our own. Rising from her throne, the Empress's chitinous armor clattered as she moved, each step a declaration of her power and authority. "Talon," she commanded, her voice dripping with venom, "you will lead our fleet to Earth. Crush their defenses and capture this Charles Allen. I want him brought before me in chains so he can watch as we enslave his species." Talon bowed even lower, his forehead touching the cold stone floor, his body trembling with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "As you command, my Empress," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Soleil fleet will depart immediately." The Empress's eyes glittered with malice, her mandibles twitching in a cruel approximation of a smile. "Let this be a lesson to all who would defy the Soleil Empire," she declared, her voice ringing through the throne room. "We will not tolerate insolence from lesser species. Earth will burn and the humans will learn their place in the galaxy." Talon rose to his feet, his head still bowed, and strode out of the throne room, his mind already racing with plans for the invasion of Earth. The humans had dared to challenge the might of the Soleil Empire, and they would pay dearly for their insolence. Little did he know that Charles Allen and the humans had a few surprises in store for the Soleil Empire, and that the coming conflict would be unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. Here is the continuation of the story. Deep in the heart of Earth's most secure military complex, Charles Allen faced a room full of grim-faced generals and admirals. The holographic display cast an eerie blue glow over their features as it showed the massive Saleya invasion fleet poised at the edge of the solar system. Their alien ships bristled with enough firepower to reduce Earth's cities to molten slag. Charles pointed at the angry red swarm of enemy contacts on the display. Our latest intelligence reports confirm the Saleya are marshaling their forces for an all-out assault on Earth. Their primary targets will be our major population centers and military installations. "Goddamn bugs," growled General Mikhail Petrov, the burly Russian commander of Earth's orbital defenses. He stroked his thick salt and pepper beard. "We've put all platforms on high alert and recalled every ship to form a perimeter around Earth. But the Saleya outnumber us 3-1. We're going to need a lot more than missiles and railguns to send these bastards running back to their hive." "Agreed, General. That's where Project Trojan comes in." Charles tapped a command and the display shifted to show a sleek silver vessel, all elegant curves and angles with no visible armaments. Meet the UES Odyssey, a stealth ship packing the very latest in human tech. Her mission is to slip past the Saleya picket, infiltrate their main battle fleet, and take out their command and control ship. Admiral Nadia Solis, a sharp-featured woman with calculating eyes, crossed her arms. "Let me get this straight. You want to send a single ship alone into the heart of the enemy armada? With all due respect, Ambassador, that's suicide. The Saleya will swat the Odyssey like a fly." Charles shook his head, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. "The Odyssey is full of surprises, Admiral. Her hull is sheathed in an experimental metamaterial that scatters Saleya's sensor beams, rendering her effectively invisible. She's also equipped with a prototype jump drive that allows her to make short-range teleportation hops. Get the Odyssey close enough to the Saleya flagship, and a few well-placed antimatter charges will gut the alien fleet." For a long moment, the assembled officers were silent, the only sound the soft hum of the display table. Charles watched as they weighed the audacious plan, the risks, the potential for catastrophe, and the even greater risk of doing nothing while the Saleya attacked. Finally, Petrov gave a sharp nod. "Bold, dangerous, but it may be our only chance to throw the Saleya off balance. You have a go, Ambassador, and may God have mercy on us all." Charles snapped off a sharp salute to the grim-faced officers. Then he turned on his heel and strode from the briefing room, his footsteps echoing in the sepulchral silence. The UES Odyssey awaited, along with the fate of every man, woman, and child on Earth. Charles swore, whatever the cost, he would not fail them. Not this time. Not with the survival of the human race itself hanging in the balance. This time, the Saleya would learn what it meant to face the full fury of the human race. The Ravager hung dead in the void, plasma fires flickering along its once mighty hull. In the darkened bridge, Talon slammed a clawed fist onto the sparking control console. Emergency lights bathed his carapace in an eerie red glow. "Damage report!" he snarled at the crew scrambling to restore systems. Acrid smoke choked the air. A trembling officer reported, "Main power offline, shields down, weapons inoperable. That human ship crippled us with a single barrage." Talon's mandibles clacked in fury. The entire Saleya fleet made fools of by one puny human vessel. "Reroute all auxiliary power to engines," he snapped, "and send a message to the Empress. Inform her the invasion proceeds despite this setback." He would not let this insult to Saleya pride go unanswered. Charles Allen's victories would be short-lived. The Odyssey streaked through the void, a silver needle piercing the Saleya formation. Charles whooped as the nimble ship dodged plasma blasts and wove between enemy dreadnoughts. "May, charge the jump drive," he called to his co-pilot. "We'll hit their troop transports next." May's fingers danced over her console. "Drive charging, missiles armed." Her eyes shone with the thrill of battle. Charles grinned savagely. The Saleya invasion fleet was spread out before them, ripe for the taking. One ship at a time, he would tear the alien armada apart. He targeted a cluster of bulbous ships, each one packed with Saleya warriors hungry for human blood. Not today. The Odyssey vanished in a blaze of light, only to reappear amidst the transports. Aliens barely had time to scream before the human ship opened fire. Nuclear-tipped missiles burned through hulls and detonated deep within the transports. A dozen ships blossomed into blinding fireballs, blazing shrapnel pinwheeling through space. Charles veered the Odyssey away as the transports died in flames behind them. The Soleil fleet boiled with confusion, its formation crumbling. He had thrown the invasion into chaos, now to press the attack. Charles armed another salvo of missiles, his eyes fixed on his next target. Today, the Soleil would learn the true meaning of fear. The sky over New York City turned black as a swarm of Soleil dropships descended like a plague of locusts. Plasma blasts rained down, vaporizing cars and carving molten scars into the asphalt. Waves of insectoid soldiers poured from the ships, their chitinous exoskeletons glinting in the flames engulfing the city. A Soleil warrior leveled its plasma rifle at a terrified woman cowering behind a burned-out taxi. The alien's compound eyes glittered with cruel intelligence as its finger tightened on the trigger. Suddenly, a railgun round punched through the Soleil's head in a spray of ichor and shattered carapace. The warrior crumpled, its rifle clattering to the ground. Soldiers in powered armor marched out of the smoke, their railguns spitting death. The Soleil met them head-on, plasma rifles blazing. Bolts of energy splashed against the human's armor, scorching the ceramic plating. The soldiers returned fire, their hypersonic rounds tearing through the aliens like tissue paper. A human tank rumbled down the street, its treads crushing Soleil corpses. The tank's cannon roared, and a shell exploded in the midst of a Soleil phalanx, hurling broken bodies through the air. Overhead, sleek human fighters danced a deadly ballet with Soleil attack craft, missiles and plasma bolts crisscrossing the sky. A human jet screamed past, an alien ship hot on its tail. The human pilot jinked and juked, narrowly avoiding the plasma blasts sizzling past his cockpit. He thumbed a button on his stick, and a missile leapt from under his wing. The Soleil ship exploded in a ball of fire, raining burning wreckage onto the streets below. In the heart of the chaos, Charles Allen led his strike team through the war-torn streets. Their objective loomed ahead, a massive spire bristling with Soleil sensor arrays and communication dishes. If they could take it out, the aliens' command and control would be crippled. Charles signaled his team forward, and they advanced cautiously, leapfrogging from cover to cover. Plasma bolts sizzled overhead, and the air reeked of ozone and burnt flesh. As they neared the base of the spire, a hail of plasma fire erupted from a barricade of twisted metal. Soleil warriors poured out from behind the barrier, their weapons spitting death. Charles's team dove for cover, their armor scorched and pitted. They returned fire, railgun rounds whining through the air. Soleil warriors fell, their carapaces shattered and oozing green blood. Suddenly, a massive figure emerged from behind the barricade. It was Talon, his once gleaming exoskeleton scorched and dented from the Odyssey's attack. The alien commander's eyes locked with Charles's, and a frisson of pure hate passed between them. With a roar that shook the ground, Talon charged, his plasma cannon spitting bolts of searing energy. Charles sprinted to meet him, his armor's servos whining with the strain. The two commanders clashed in a furious melee. Charles's power armor against Talon's chitinous exoskeleton. Charles ducked under a vicious swipe of Talon's claws and rammed his armored shoulder into the alien's chest. Talon staggered back but quickly recovered, his mandibles clacking in rage. The Soleil lashed out with a powerful kick that caught Charles in the midsection, sending him flying backwards into a wall. Stars exploded across Charles's vision as he struggled to his feet. He shook his head to clear it, just in time to see Talon charging again. His claws extended. Charles lunged to the side, narrowly avoiding the alien's grasp, and brought his armored fist crashing down on Talon's head. The blow cracked Talon's helmet, and the alien commander reeled back, ichor streaming from a gash above his compound eye. Talon's mandibles worked in fury, and he slashed at Charles with renewed ferocity, his claws scoring deep rents in the human's armor. Around them, the battle raged. Humans and Soleil locked in a dance of death. Railgun rounds and plasma bolts filled the air, and the screams of the dying mingled with the roar of engines and the crack of explosions. Charles and Talon traded blows, their armor dented and scorched, their bodies battered and bleeding. Neither combatant gave quarter, neither yielded an inch. Suddenly, Charles saw an opening. Talon had overextended himself, his claws reaching for Charles's throat. Charles feinted left, then lunged right, his armored fist pistoning out in a devastating uppercut. His fist connected with Talon's jaw with a sickening crunch, and the alien's head snapped back. Talon staggered, his mandibles slack, ichor dripping from his shattered mouthparts. Charles pressed his advantage, raining blows on the alien commander's head and torso. Talon's exoskeleton cracked and splintered under the onslaught, and the alien crashed to the ground, his limbs twitching spasmodically. With Talon down, the Selae defense faltered. Charles's team surged forward, railguns blazing. They cleared the barricade and stormed the base of the spire, cutting down the remaining defenders with ruthless efficiency. Charles and his team planted explosive charges at key structural points, then fell back to a safe distance. Charles armed the detonator, his finger hovering over the trigger. He glanced back at the spire, a grim smile on his blood-streaked face. "Fire in the hole!" he growled and pressed the button. The charges detonated with a deafening roar, and the spire exploded in a massive fireball. A shockwave of heat and pressure washed over Charles and his team, setting their armor smoking. The spire's upper levels collapsed in on themselves, tons of metal and composites crashing down in a cascading avalanche of destruction. The Selae communication network went dark, the aliens' command and control thrown into disarray. Charles watched the spire burn, his armor battered and scorched, his body aching with a dozen wounds. But his spirit was unbroken, his resolve undiminished. "That's one small step for man," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and pain. "One giant leap for sticking it to these bug-eyed bastards." He turned to his team, his eyes hard and bright in his soot-streaked face. "Let's move out. We've got a planet to save." In the smoking ruins of New York City, the battle raged on. With the Selae communication hub destroyed, the alien forces fell into chaos, their formations fracturing. Human soldiers in powered armor pressed the advantage, railguns roaring as they cut down the disorganized insectoids. Tanks rolled over barricades of twisted metal and Selae corpses, their treads crushing chitin and bone. But deep beneath the shattered streets, in a reinforced bunker, the Selae Empress watched the carnage unfold with cold, calculating eyes. Holographic displays flickered before her, each one showing a different view of the battle above. Her mandibles clicked in irritation as she watched her warriors fall before the human onslaught. "We underestimated these humans," she said, her voice a rasping hiss. "They fight with a ferocity we have not seen before." A massive Selae warrior stepped forward, his exoskeleton scarred from 100 battles. "They are still just meat and bone, my Empress," he said, his cybernetic claw flexing. "We will crush them, as we have crushed so many other species." The Empress turned to face him, her compound eyes glittering. "And how do you propose we do that, General Krazak? Our troops are in disarray, our communications disrupted." Krazak's mandibles twitched in what might have been a smile. "Our scientists have developed a new weapon, my Empress, a neurological agent that targets the human brain, causing hallucinations and paranoia. If we deploy it in their cities, we can sow chaos and confusion among their ranks." The Empress considered this for a moment, her claws tapping against the armrest of her throne. "Very well," she said at last. "Prepare the agent for deployment. We will unleash it on their largest population centers, where it will do the most damage." She turned back to the holographic displays, her eyes narrowing. "And find me Talon. It is time he redeemed himself for his failure." Miles away, Charles Allen and his strike team picked their way through the rubble-strewn streets, their power armor scorched and dented from days of constant fighting. They had intercepted Selae transmissions hinting at a secret bunker beneath the city, and they were determined to find it and eliminate the Selae leadership. "Stay sharp," Charles said over the team's comm channel. "The bugs could be anywhere." As if on cue, A swarm of Soleil drones descended from the sky, their metallic carapaces glinting in the sun. Each one carried a payload of the neurological agent, ready to unleash it on the human soldiers. "Incoming!" May shouted, her railgun already swiveling to track the drones. The team opened fire, hypervelocity rounds ripping through the swarm. Drones exploded in showers of metal and sparks, but more kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. A drone swooped low over Charles's head, a stream of sickly green gas spewing from its underbelly. He felt the agent seep into his helmet, his vision blurring at the edges. Hallucinations danced at the corners of his eyes, twisted, nightmarish shapes that gibbered and howled. He shook his head, trying to clear it. He couldn't afford to lose focus, not now. The bunker was close, he could feel it. The team fought their way through the drone swarm, their armor protecting them from the worst of the agent's effects. But they could all feel it coursing through their veins, twisting their thoughts and perceptions. Finally, they reached the outskirts of the ruined city, where the bunker was located. Massive blast doors loomed before them, sealed tight against the outside world. Charles placed a shaped charge against the doors, his hands shaking slightly as he armed the detonator. The agent was getting stronger, the hallucinations more vivid. He gritted his teeth and pushed through it. He had to end this, here and now, for Earth, for humanity. The charge detonated with a thunderous roar, blasting the doors off their hinges. Charles and his team charged through the smoke and debris, weapons at the ready. They emerged into a vast, dimly lit chamber, lined with pulsing power conduits and humming machinery. And there, at the far end of the room, sat the Soleil Empress, her chitinous bulk perched atop a throne of twisted metal. "Welcome, humans," she hissed, her mandibles clicking in amusement. "You have fought well, but your struggle is futile. The Soleil Empire will prevail, as it always has." Charles raised his railgun, his vision swimming with hallucinations. He could see Talon standing beside the Empress, his exoskeleton whole and unblemished, as if their earlier battle had never happened. "Surrender now," Charles growled, his voice rough with exhaustion and pain, "and I'll consider letting you live." The Empress laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the chamber. "You are in no position to make demands, human. You are outmatched and outnumbered. The neurological agent will soon reduce you to gibbering wrecks, unable to tell friend from foe." She rose from her throne, her claws flexing. "And then we will crush your pitiful species once and for all." Charles's finger tightened on the trigger, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment of truth, the final battle for the fate of Earth and all humanity. He just hoped that he and his team could hold out long enough to see it through. Charles and his team pushed deeper into the Soleil bunker, their powered armor thudding against the metal deck plates. The corridors twisted and turned, a labyrinth of dimly lit passages and shadowed alcoves. Soleil warriors lurked around every corner, their plasma rifles spitting bolts of searing energy. The neurological agent seeped into Charles's mind, turning the bunker into a nightmarish dreamscape. Insectoid shadows skittered along the walls, and the faces of his fallen comrades leered at him from the darkness. He gritted his teeth and pushed on, relying on his training to separate reality from illusion. Suddenly, a blast of dark energy slammed into Charles's chest, sending him flying backwards. He crashed into a bulkhead, his armor absorbing most of the impact. Shaking his head to clear it, he looked up to see Talon striding towards him, a pulsing staff crackling with eldritch power. "You should have stayed on your own world, human," Talon sneered, his mandibles clicking. "Now you will die here, light years from home." The Soleil commander lunged forward, his staff a blur of motion. Charles barely had time to raise his energy shield before the weapon crashed against it, sending shockwaves rippling through his body. He staggered back, his teeth rattling in his skull. Talon pressed his advantage, raining down blows with blinding speed. Each strike sent Charles reeling, his shield flickering and dimming under the onslaught. The Soleil's forearms moved in a dizzying blur, the staff striking from every angle. Charles's team rushed to his aid, their railguns roaring. Hypersonic rounds pinged off Talon's armor, leaving pockmarks and dents. The Soleil commander ignored them, his attention focused solely on Charles. "You humans are weak," Talon taunted, his voice dripping with contempt. "You rely on your technology and your tricks, but in the end you are no match for the Soleil." Charles gritted his teeth and launched himself at Talon, his armored fist striking at the Soleil's weak points. He landed a solid blow to Talon's midsection, feeling the alien's exoskeleton crack under the impact. Talon staggered back, momentarily off balance. But the Soleil recovered quickly, retaliating with a blast of dark energy from his staff. The bolt caught Charles square in the chest, hurling him across the room. He slammed into a console, sparks flying from shattered displays. Charles's vision swam, the neurological agent twisting the world around him. He saw Talon looming over him, the Soleil's face a nightmarish mask of chitin and hate. He shook his head, trying to clear the hallucinations. His team laid down covering fire, forcing Talon back. They engaged the Soleil warriors hand to hand, the corridor erupting into a brutal melee. Charles staggered to his feet, his armor whining with the effort. Talon was already closing in for another attack, his staff pulsing with malevolent energy. Charles knew he couldn't take much more punishment from the alien weapon. He needed to end this fight, and fast. He activated his armor's cloaking device, vanishing from sight. Talon spun around, trying to track Charles's movements, but the human was too quick, circling around behind the Soleil commander. Charles deactivated his cloak and launched himself at Talon, hitting the alien with a flying tackle. They crashed to the deck, rolling and grappling. Charles grabbed for the staff, trying to wrench it from Talon's grasp. The Soleil commander fought back with savage strength, his claws raking at Charles's armor. But the human's powered exoskeleton gave him the edge. With a final burst of effort, Charles tore the staff from Talon's hands. He rolled to his feet, the staff crackling in his grip. Talon lunged at him, mandibles wide in a roar of fury. Charles sidestepped the attack and brought the staff down on his armored knee, snapping it in half. Talon let out a howl of rage and charged, but Charles was ready for him. He ducked under the Soleil's grasping claws and delivered a devastating uppercut to Talon's jaw. The alien's head snapped back, and he crumpled to the deck, unconscious. Charles stood over Talon's prone form, breathing hard. His team finished off the last of the Soleil warriors and regrouped around him, their armor scarred and pitted from the fighting. "The command center should be just ahead," Charles said, pointing down the corridor. "The Empress will be waiting for us." He looked at each of his soldiers in turn, seeing the determination in their eyes, even through the haze of the neurological agent. They had come this far, and they would see this through to the end, no matter the cost. Charles hefted his railgun and started down the corridor, his team falling into step behind him. The Soleil Empress was out there somewhere, along with the fate of Earth and every living thing in the galaxy. It was time to finish this, once and for all. Charles and his team fought their way through the labyrinthine corridors of the Soleil bunker, their power armor clanking with each step. The neurological agent seeped into their minds, turning the world into a distorted nightmare. Walls seemed to warp and twist, and shadows danced at the edges of their vision. Charles gritted his teeth and pushed forward, his armor system struggling to filter out the agent's effects. His team followed close behind, their movements sluggish and uncoordinated. As they approached the command center, a wave of vertigo slammed into them. Charles staggered, his balance deserting him. He crashed into a wall, his armor denting the metal. His team fared no better, stumbling and swaying as if drunk. Suddenly, a towering hologram of the Soleil Empress materialized before them. Her chitinous visage filled the corridor, her compound eyes glittering with malice. "Foolish humans," she hissed, her voice booming from hidden speakers. "You think you can defeat the Soleil Empire? We have conquered 1,000 worlds, and yours will be no different." Charles shook his head, trying to clear the fog from his mind. He stepped forward, his armor's speakers amplifying his voice. "We gave you a warning, and you didn't listen. Now you'll face the consequences." The Empress laughed, a grating sound that sent shivers down Charles's spine. "You are in no position to make threats, human. Even now, my forces are deploying the neurological agent in your cities. Your people will tear each other apart, and your world will be ripe for the taking. Rage surged through Charles's veins, burning away the agent's effects. He knew the Empress was trying to break him, to crush his spirit beneath her iron will. But he also knew that the human spirit was indomitable, unbreakable. He rallied his team with a battle cry, and they charged forward, bursting into the command center with weapons blazing. Plasma bolts and railgun rounds filled the air, slamming into Sci-Fi warriors and control panels alike. The Empress stood at the center of the chaos, surrounded by her elite guard. She wielded a pair of plasma swords, their blades humming with lethal energy. She moved with blinding speed, her swords weaving a deadly dance. Charles and his team met the Sci-Fi head-on, their power armor absorbing the worst of the plasma fire. They fought with desperate fury, dodging and weaving amidst the storm of blades and bolts. The Empress joined the fray, her swords flashing as she cut down human soldiers with ruthless efficiency. Charles saw his comrades fall, their armor sliced open like tin cans. Rage and grief fueled his attacks as he fought his way towards the Empress. She met his charge with a flurry of blows, her swords clashing against his armor's energy shield. Charles activated his armor's strength enhancers and struck at the Empress with all his might. She parried his blow, but the force of the impact sent her staggering back, her swords wavering. Pressing his advantage, Charles rained down blows on the Empress's defenses, his armored fists pounding against her swords. She gave ground before him, her guard falling apart piece by piece. With a final, desperate lunge, Charles landed a devastating uppercut to the Empress's jaw. The blow lifted her off her feet and sent her flying across the room. She slammed into a bank of computer terminals, sparks cascading from shattered screens. Charles advanced on the fallen Empress, his armor's weapons trained on her battered form. "It's over," he growled, his voice hard as steel. "Call off your forces and leave Earth alone." The Empress glared up at him, hatred burning in her compound eyes. "Never!" she spat, ichor dripping from her mouthparts. "The Sci-Fi Empire will never surrender to the likes of you." Charles sighed, a sound of finality. He raised his arm, his armor's plasma cannon humming with barely restrained power. "Then you leave me no choice." He fired, and the world vanished in a blaze of searing white light. The Empress's scream cut off abruptly as the plasma bolt consumed her, reducing her to a charred husk in an instant. Charles turned to his team, his expression grim. "We've won the battle, but the war is far from over. We need to find a way to stop the neurological agent before it's too late." Without another word, he strode out of the command center, his team falling in behind him. They had to get back to the surface, to warn Earth's defenders of the Sci-Fi's final gambit. The fate of the human race hung in the balance, and Charles would be damned if he let it fall. Charles Allen and his strike team plunged into the nightmarish depths of the Sci-Fi mothership, their boots pounding against the pulsing, fleshy deck. The air hung thick with the stench of alien musk and acrid machine oil. Grotesque, half-organic, half-mechanical conduits snaked along the bulkheads, thrumming with unholy life. A chittering horde of Sci-Fi warriors boiled out of shadowed alcoves, their twisted forms bristling with cruel barbs and dripping talons. Gene-forged monstrosities lunged from the seething mass, all fangs and fury. A hulking brute with the strength of a bear barreled into Sergeant Hawkins, crushing him against a bulkhead with a sickening crunch. Private Myers screamed as a whip-fast horror sank venomous fangs into his throat, its serpentine body coiling around his flailing limbs. Charles's engineered reflexes kicked into overdrive. He snap-fired his plasma rifle, vaporizing the snake thing's head in a burst of boiling ichor. His superhuman legs propelled him forward, smashing a leopard-fast monstrosity aside with a biotechnology-enhanced haymaker. "Keep moving!" Charles roared over the din of battle and dying screams. "We have to reach the reactor core!" They fought their way deeper into the bowels of the great ship, a running battle against the Sci-Fi's blasphemous biomechanical creations. Charles wrested a pulsing, tumor-like plasma cannon from a fallen abomination and turned it against its makers, spraying the corridors with searing blue-white fire. At last they reached the final chamber, a cavernous space dominated by the huge beating heart of the ship's reactor. But before they could approach, the deck plates shuddered beneath their feet. A colossal shape rose from a yawning pit, a Sci-Fi guardian, more machine now than alien. Segmented metal limbs pistoned into place around a pulsing sack of warp plasma. Crustacean eyes swiveled and locked onto the strike team with malevolent intent. Vicious-looking weapon muzzles twitched and spat crackling energy. Charles and his soldiers fanned out, pouring plasma fire and hypersonic slugs into the Guardian's armored carapace to little effect. It scuttled forward, slag cannons thundering. Shapes fell screaming, bodies sundered and burned. Charles rolled desperately to avoid a stabbing claw, proximity alarms howling in his ears. His rifle's mag ran dry with a hollow click. Cursing, Charles slapped a bandolier of breaching charges across the monster's flank, but the detonation barely scorched its ablative shielding. He rolled clear of another swipe, his mind racing. The damn thing was too heavily armored. He had to hit it from the inside. In a reckless gambit, Charles jetted forward, allowing the Guardian's claw to snatch him up. Servos whined as the pincers squeezed inexorably shut, crushing his armor like a flimsy tin can. Charles fumbled for the charge's primer with a rapidly numbing hand. The thing's mandibles yawned wide, a foul, shredding void. Fading consciousness, Charles thumbed the primer. The world vanished in thunder and fire. The blast hurled Charles away like a rag doll. He hit the deck hard, skidding through gore and twisted shrapnel. His armor's biomonitors screamed damage and trauma warnings. Charles blinked blood from his eyes, sprawled across the buckled deck plates. Where the Guardian had loomed, only a seething crater remained. "Charles!" May's shout pierced the ringing in his skull. "The reactor! We're almost out of time!" Charles dragged himself upright on trembling limbs and staggered to the huge reactor sphere suspended over the plasma pit. His hands shook as he armed the antimatter charge and set the timer. Just a few more seconds. A plasma bolt sizzled over his shoulder, splashing against the reactor housing in a spray of molten metal. Sci-Fi warriors stormed into the chamber, alien curses on their mandibles. Charles's team laid down a hail of covering fire from the dubious shelter of twisted wreckage. Charles slapped the final primer into place. "Charges set!" he shouted over the bark of weapons fire. "We need to get clear!" But the Sci-Fi pressed their attack with renewed ferocity, driven by the desperate knowledge that their ship was doomed. A plasma bolt caught Charles high in the chest, searing pain and the iridescent red of blood. His legs folded and he crashed to the deck. His vision swam with encroaching darkness. From a million miles away, he heard May screaming his name. He watched his team fighting, falling, buying him a few more precious seconds with their lives. He whispered a prayer for their souls. And the world went white as the reactor went critical. The Sci-Fi plasma blasts seared past Charles's head, slagging the conduits behind him into molten ruin. His railgun kicked and bucked as he returned fire, the hypersonic slugs scything through chitin and ichor. But for every Sci-Fi he cut down, two more surged forward, a chittering tide of hate and serrated claws. "Fall back!" Charles roared over the din of battle. "Defensive positions around the reactor core!" His team obeyed instantly, laying down a withering hail of covering fire as they leapfrogged back. But the Sci-Fi pressed their attack with fanatical zeal, uncaring of the mounting casualties. Concentrated plasma fire melted through Sergeant Rodriguez's chest plate, burning through his heart in a spray of gore. Private Jameson caught a scything claw across his visor, the razor chitin decapitating him in a crimson geyser. Charles gritted his teeth, tasting blood and despair. Ammunition counters flashed red on his HUD. Armor integrity warnings shrieked with each impact. They were trapped, cut off, doomed. The detonator felt like a lead weight in his hands. Suddenly, the entire ship heaved and quaked, titanic tremors throwing both humans and Sci-Fi from their feet. A thunderous explosion ripped through the far wall, tearing a jagged hole into the reactor chamber. Acrid smoke and flames billowed from the breach. Charles staggered upright, shaking his head to clear the ringing from his skull. Through the haze, he saw armored figures pouring through the breach, the stuttering muzzle flashes of human weaponry blazing in the gloom. His heart leapt even as his mind reeled in disbelief. At the head of the charging reinforcements strode Talon. The huge Scyllae's carapace was rent and blackened, ichor oozing from a dozen wounds, but he came on like an implacable engine of destruction, scything down his former comrades with ruthless efficiency. Behind him came a score of renegade Scyllae, their loyalties apparently shifted. "Forward!" Talon roared, his voice a grating boom. "For the future of both our races." Galvanized, Charles rallied his battered team and surged to meet their unlikely allies. As one, they crashed into the Scyllae lines like a human tidal wave, turning the tide with renewed fury. Charles fought back-to-back with Talon, the two former enemies now bonded by the desperate struggle. Plasma bolts crisscrossed the chamber in blazing networks of death. Chitin and armor splintered and cracked. Ichor misted the air in hissing sprays. Charles lost himself in the madness of close-quarters battle, all snarling fury and point-blank savagery. After an eternity of blood and thunder, the Scyllae ranks finally buckled and broke. The few survivors scuttled for the exits, leaving their dead and dying heaped in mounds of reeking carnage. An eerie quiet descended, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the hissing of ruptured conduits. Charles limped to the reactor core, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Shaking fingers fumbled with the detonator, arming the antimatter charges with trembling haste. He was vaguely aware of Talon at his side, the huge Scyllae watching his back against any final treachery. The detonator blinked green, the timer set. Charles began to turn, a grim smile of triumph on his bloody lips. In that instant, a plasma bolt seared out from the shadows and took him square in the chest. The world exploded into searing agony, the stink of charred meat. He crumpled, his nerveless fingers dropping the detonator. Dimly, through a red haze of pain, he saw Talon snatch up the fallen device. The renegade Scyllae cradled Charles close, his insectoid visage blurring. "Why?" Charles gasped out through bloody lips. It hurt to breathe, a wet, sucking agony in his lungs. Talon's mandibles worked, a strangely human gesture of emotion. "Because you were right, Charles Allen. Your courage and honor showed me the truth, that our two races need not be enemies, that the Scyllae Empire's path is one of madness and ruin. I fight for a new future now." A ghost of a smile flickered across Charles's face. "Then finish it, my friend. Blow this cursed ship to atoms. Show the galaxy that even the mightiest tyranny can be brought low." Talon nodded solemnly and keyed the final activation code into the detonator. The antimatter charges hummed with awakening power, an ominous rising whine. "Come on, you apes," Talon boomed out. "You want to live forever? Back to the transport, double time." The ragtag band of humans and renegade Scyllae fled the doomed ship, carrying their wounded and dead. Charles hung limp in Talon's arms, his head lolling, darkness washing in and out. He faded to the pounding of armored boots on deck plates, the howling of warning klaxons, the rumble of the transport's drives. And then the Scyllae mothership vanished in a sun-bright flash, a new star blossoming in the void. The shockwave hammered the fleeing transport, sending it tumbling end over end. Somewhere in the jolting madness, Charles slipped into the waiting dark. He awoke to the tang of antiseptic and the beep of medical monitors. His eyelids felt crusted with lead, his body a distant leaden thing. Blurred figures swam into focus. Talon, May, the other survivors. They looked haggard, battered, but alive. Gloriously, improbably alive. Beyond the medbay viewports, the blue curve of Earth dominated the star-flecked void. Battered, besieged, but still unbowed, still free. The scattered wrecks of Scyllae ships glittered in the orbital lanes like shattered insects. A savage smile split Charles's cracked lips. Talon loomed over his bed, a strange mix of emotions in his compound eyes. Respect, sorrow, grim resolve. It's over, Charles. We did it. The Soleil invasion has been broken. The Empress is dead, her fleet in ruins. My people, those that survived, have surrendered. Charles tried to speak, coughed wetly. May laid a calming hand on his bandaged chest. Don't try to talk, Charles. You've got a sucking chest wound and more broken bones than the docs could count. It's a miracle you're alive at all. Charles ignored the warning, forced the words out in a painful rasp. We won a battle, not the war. The Soleil Empire is still out there, among the stars. They'll be back someday, stronger and more terrible than ever. Talon nodded grimly. And we'll be ready for them, humans and Soleil, shoulder to shoulder, as allies and friends. You've shown us a better way, Charles Allen. A path of honor and justice. We won't forget that. Charles sank back against the pillows, suddenly spent. But a fierce light kindled in his eyes, banishing the waiting shadows. The fight was far from over. But for now, for this one shining moment, victory was theirs. And that was enough. Charles's eyes fluttered open, the harsh glare of the medbay light stabbing into his skull. He groaned, the taste of blood and ash thick on his tongue. Every inch of his body screamed in agony, a patchwork of burns, lacerations, and fractured bones. Talon loomed over him, the Soleil's once implacable features softened with concern. Easy, my friend, he rumbled, a clawed hand resting gently on Charles's shoulder. You took quite a beating back there. But thanks to you, the Soleil mothership is nothing but dust and echoes. Charles managed a weak grin, his split lips cracking. Guess we showed those bugs what for, huh? Never thought I'd see the day when I'd be fighting side by side with a Soleil, though. Talon's mandibles twitched in what might have been a smile. Nor I with a human, but you have shown me the error of my people's ways, Charles Allen. Together we can forge a new path, one of peace and understanding between our races. Charles nodded, wincing as the motion sent fresh waves of pain lancing through his head. Speaking of together, what's the situation out there? Last thing I remember, we were hightailing it off that mothership with a nuke up our ass. Talon's expression turned grim. The immediate threat has been neutralized, but the damage the Soleil wrought will take years to repair. Dr. Patel's cure has stopped the neurological agent, but not before it caused widespread panic and violence. And not all humans are as enlightened as you, my friend. Many still view my kind with fear and hatred. Charles struggled to sit up, gritting his teeth against the agony. Enlightened, huh? Guess getting my ass kicked by a Soleil on the regular does wonders for interspecies relations. The medbay door hissed open, admitting a grim-faced soldier in battle-scarred armor. Commander Talon, sir. We have a situation. Talon turned, his eyes hardening. Report, Lieutenant. It's the extremists, sir. They've launched a series of attacks against Soleil settlements on Earth. They're using stolen Soleil tech and weapons, hitting hard and fast. No survivors. Charles swung his legs over the side of the bed, ignoring the screaming protest of his battered body. Extremists? What extremists? The lieutenant glanced at him, swallowing nervously. It's Marcus Klein, sir. That demagogue who's been stirring up anti-Soleil sentiment since the invasion. He's rallied a bunch of hardliners to his cause, saying the only good bug is a dead bug. Pardon my French, Commander. Talon waved a hand dismissively. I've been called worse by my own kind. Where are Klein and his fanatics now? We tracked them to a compound deep in the Rocky Mountains. They've fortified the place to the teeth, and they're sitting on a huge cache of stolen Soleil ordnance. The Joint Chiefs have authorized a strike, but it's going to be a tough nut to crack. Charles hauled himself to his feet, swaying slightly. Sounds like you could use an extra gun hand, Talon, old buddy. What do you say we go knock some sense into these extremist assholes? Talon eyed him dubiously. Charles, you can barely stand. This is a job for the newly formed Human Soleil Task Force, not a half-dead hero with more balls than brains. Charles flashed him a bloody grin. Hey, you're the one who said we had to forge a new path together. What better way to do that than kicking some racist fuckwit ass side by side? Talon shook his head, but there was a glimmer of respect in his compound eyes. Very well, you crazy bastard. Suit up and report to the armory. We drop in 30. As the lieutenant led them through the war-torn streets, the scale of the devastation became clear. Once proud skyscrapers lay in ruins, their facades scorched and crumbling. Burnout vehicles choked the rubble-strewn roads, many still containing the charred remains of their occupants. But amidst the destruction, there were also signs of hope. Human and Sele work crews labored side by side to clear debris and restore power and water. Medics of both races tended to the wounded, the boundaries of species forgotten in the face of shared suffering. Charles felt a swell of pride as he watched a human child offer a tentative smile to a towering Sele warrior. The alien knelt down, his chitinous features softening as he accepted a small flower from the girl's grubby hand. But the moment was shattered by the distant rattle of gunfire and the thump of explosions. Klein's fanatics, sowing more chaos and death. Charles's jaw tightened as he quickened his pace towards the waiting dropship, Talon falling into step beside him. The flight to the extremists' compound passed in a blur of terse briefings and weapons checks. Charles tried to ignore the concerned glances from Talon and the other task force members, focusing instead on the mission ahead. The dropship bucked and yawed as anti-aircraft fire streaked past the viewport. The pilot jinked and wove, trying to evade the deadly flak. Charles braced himself against the bulkhead, his newly regenerated skin slick with cold sweat. Beside him, Talon flexed his claws, his eyes hard and focused. 30 seconds, the pilot barked over the intercom. LZ is hot. Repeat, LZ is hot. We're taking heavy fire from the compound. Charles slammed a magazine into his railgun and thumbed the selector to full auto. Just get us on the ground in one piece, flyboy. We'll take care of the rest. The dropship flared and settled onto the rocky ground with a bone-jarring thud. The ramp slammed down, and Charles was moving, Talon and the rest of the strike team close on his heels. Plasma bolts and tracer rounds crisscrossed the night sky as they sprinted for the cover of a shattered boulder. Charles felt the heat of near misses sizzling past his face, his ears ringing with the concussive roar of explosions. Klein's got this place locked down tighter than a nun's asshole, he shouted over the din of battle. We need to find a way inside. Talon risked a quick peek over the lip of the boulder, his eyes narrowing. There, the drainage culvert at the base of the north wall. If we can get a breaching charge on that grate, we'll have our entry point. Charles nodded, adrenaline singing in his veins. I'll draw their fire. You get that charge set. On my mark, now. He burst from cover, his railgun spitting high-velocity death. Extremists screamed and fell, their chests blown open by the armor-piercing rounds. Charles zigzagged across the killing ground, his genetically enhanced reflexes the only thing keeping him ahead of the hail of return fire. Talon moved like a ghost, his cloaking field shimmering as he darted from shadow to shadow. In seconds, he was at the culvert, nimble claws arming the breaching charge. He gave Charles a curt nod and then vanished back into the night. Charles dove into a shell crater just as the charge detonated with a deafening boom. The grate exploded inward in a shower of twisted metal, opening the way into the bowels of the compound. Go, go, go! Charles roared, waving the strike team forward. They plunged into the jagged opening, weapons at the ready, prepared for anything. But what they found in the heart of Klein's fortress defied their darkest imaginings. A towering mech suit, bristling with plasma cannons and missile pods, loomed out of the shadows. And there, in the armored cockpit, sat Marcus Klein himself, his face twisted in a rictus of hate. Die, alien scum! He screamed, his amplified voice booming from the mech's external speakers. Earth belongs to humanity! The mech's weapons roared to life, filling the air with searing plasma and high-explosive death. Charles and the others scattered, diving for any scrap of cover in the cavernous chamber. Concentrate fire on the legs! Talon bellowed, unleashing a barrage of plasma bolts at the mech's knee joints. Bring that thing down! But the mech's armor was too thick. the extremists' engineering too precise. Rockets and railgun slugs spanged off the ablative plating, leaving only pitted scars in their wake. Charles cursed as his weapon clicked empty, the barrel smoking. He slammed his last magazine home and rolled to a new position, trying to find a weakness, any weakness, in Klein's armored behemoth. And then he saw it, a hairline fracture in the mech's chest plating, just above the thrumming power core, a legacy of some ancient battle, a chink in the monster's otherwise impervious hide. Charles keyed his comm, his voice raw with desperation. "Talon, the chest plate? Hit it dead center, everything you've got." Talon didn't hesitate. He charged from cover, a plasma grenade primed and ready in each claw. The mech pivoted to face him, missile pods belching smoke and fire. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Charles watched in horror as a cluster of rockets streaked towards Talon, the Soleil warrior's cloaking field flickering and dying under the onslaught. But Talon never broke stride. With a roar of defiance, he leapt for the mech's chest, slamming the plasma grenades into the fractured plating. The magnetic clamps engaged with a dull clunk, locking the deadly charges in place. And then the grenades detonated, and the world vanished in a maelstrom of blinding light and searing heat. The mech staggered back, its chest plate a molten ruin. Smoke and flames belched from the gaping wound, and the machine toppled like a felled oak, its limbs twitching spasmodically. Charles was moving before the echoes of the blast had faded, sprinting towards the downed mech with his heart in his throat. He clambered up the wreckage, heedless of the jagged metal tearing at his hands and feet. He found Talon slumped against the mech's twisted leg, ichor pooling beneath his mangled body. The Selai's breath came in ragged gasps, his compound eyes flickering weakly. "You crazy bastard," Charles croaked, cradling Talon's head in his lap. "What the hell were you thinking?" Talon coughed, a wet, ugly sound. Didn't want you stealing all the glory, human. Had to show you how it's done." Charles shook his head, blinking back the sudden sting of tears. "Goddamn bugs, always hogging the spotlight. Just hang on, okay? We'll get you patched up, good as new." But even as he said it, Charles knew it was a lie. Talon's wounds were too severe, his lifeblood pooling too fast. The Soleil warrior shuddered, his claws twitching feebly. "Charles, do you think they'll remember us? What we did here today?" Charles nodded fiercely, his vision blurring. "You're damn right they will. They'll sing songs about us, Bug. The human and the Soleil who saved two worlds, who forged a new path together." Talon's mandibles twitched in a faint smile. "Together," he echoed, his voice fading. "I like the sound of that." And then he was gone, his compound eyes staring sightlessly at the smoke-stained sky. Charles bowed his head, grief and rage and bitter pride warring in his chest. Marcus Klein was dead, his poisonous hate silenced forever. The extremist threat was ended, cut down in a hail of plasma fire and selfless sacrifice. But the cost had been high, too high. Charles rose to his feet, Talon's limp form cradled in his arms. He carried his fallen comrade out of that place of death and madness, into the cool night air where the rest of the strike team waited. No one spoke as Charles laid Talon's body down with infinite gentleness. They simply formed up around him, human and Soleil alike, united in their grief and their grim resolve. There was still so much to do, so much to rebuild. The scars left by the Soleil invasion and Klein's hate would be slow to fade. But Charles knew that they would face the future together, as allies and friends. For in the end, it was not their differences that defined them, but their common hopes, their shared dreams. The dream of a universe where all beings could live in peace and understanding, free from the shackles of fear and prejudice. It was a dream worth fighting for, worth dying for. And as Charles looked out over the war-torn landscape, he knew that the fight was far from over. But for now, for this one shining moment, they had prevailed. And that was enough. Time slowed to a crawl as Talon's plasma bolt streaked towards the mech's exposed power core. The world narrowed to that single glowing weakness, the key to humanity's salvation. Marcus Klein, the madman who had sought to annihilate the Soleil and enslave his own people, looked up in horror as the bolt found its mark. The explosion was cataclysmic. A miniature sun blossomed in the heart of the mech, consuming Klein and his delusions of racial purity in a maelstrom of white-hot plasma. The war machine staggered and toppled like a felled colossus, its once mighty limbs reduced to molten slag. Talon wasted no time in mopping up the remaining extremists. His strike team moved through the compound like vengeful ghosts, plasma rifles spitting blue death. The fanatics fell like wheat before the scythe, their stolen Soleil weapons clattering to the blood-slicked floor. But even as the last shot faded, a new crisis loomed. Talon's comm crackled with dire urgency, the voice of Earth's high command. Talon, we've got a situation. A massive Soleil fleet just jumped into the solar system, on a direct course for Earth. They're being led by some new emperor, a real piece of work. We need you back here now. Talon felt a cold fist close around his heart. The Soleil had returned, led by a new despot hungry for human blood. The Empress was dead, but her legacy of conquest lived on. He turned to his team, jaw set with grim resolve. You heard the man. We're heading back to Earth. Looks like our bug hunt isn't over yet. The flight back was a blur of hasty briefings and terse silences. Earth's defenses were in shambles, its fleets decimated by the Soleil onslaught. Against this new foe, armed with advanced weapons beyond human ken, they stood little chance. But they had to try. The alternative was too horrific to contemplate. They rendezvoused with the ragged remains of Earth's space forces, now under the command of newly minted Captain Mei Xiang. The loss of Charles still weighed heavy on them all, but Mei carried the burden of leadership with fierce determination. The Soleil outnumber and outgun us at every turn, she said, her voice hard as steel. But we have one advantage they don't. You, Talon. Your knowledge of their technology. Talon leaned forward, compound eyes glinting. I have an idea, a way to level the playing field, but it's risky. We'll need to get close to their flagship, plant an EMP device. It'll fry their systems, leave them vulnerable. May nodded grimly. A boarding action then. We'll hit them with everything we've got, buy you the time you need. It was a desperate plan, but what choice did they have? The fate of humanity hung by a thread. As Talon and his strike team prepared to depart, May pulled him aside. Her eyes were fierce, but her words held a hint of warmth. I know we've had our differences, but I want you to know that I'm glad you're on our side. Charles would be proud of what you've become. Talon felt a sudden tightness in his throat. The weight of the fallen pressed down on him, the faces of all those he had lost, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the mission at hand. I'll make sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain, he growled. We'll stop the Soleil once and for all. The hangar doors rumbled open, revealing the looming bulk of the captured Soleil transport. Talon strode up the ramp, his strike team falling into step behind him. They were all veterans, humans and Soleil alike, united by bonds forged in the crucible of war. But this would be their greatest test yet. The Soleil flagship awaited, a fortress of dread bristling with enough firepower to scour a world clean of life. Talon settled into the pilot's chair, his claws dancing over the control runes. The engines roared to life, the deck plates thrumming with barely contained power. Strap in, he barked over the comm. We're going in hot, and may the gods have mercy on us all. The transport surged forward, plunging into the void like an avenging angel. Towards the battle that would decide the fate of two races, two worlds. Towards the Soleil and whatever dark future they sought to impose on the galaxy. The captured Soleil transport drifted through the void, its hull pitted and scarred from a dozen battles. Inside, Talon and his strike team checked their weapons and armor, the air heavy with tension and anticipation. This was it, the mission that could turn the tide of the war. Failure was not an option. Remember the plan, Talon growled, his voice hard and sharp. One team plants the EMP, the other keeps the bugs busy. We hit hard, hit fast, and get the hell out. The transport shuddered as it passed through the flagship's shields, the alien energies crackling over its battered hull. In the cockpit, the pilot's hands flew over the controls, guiding the ship into the cavernous hangar bay. The transport settled to the deck with a bone-jarring thud, the ramp slamming down. "Go! Go! Go!" Talon roared, and the strike team surged forward, weapons spitting death. Soleil warriors boiled out of the shadows, plasma rifles blazing. The hangar dissolved into a maelstrom of fire and blood. Talon led the diversion team deeper into the ship, the corridors ringing with the thunder of gunfire. He moved like a ghost, his plasma rifle flashing, Soleil warriors falling before him. His team fanned out behind him, covering angles, tossing grenades. They fought with the desperate fury of cornered wolves, knowing that every second bought was a second closer to victory. In the bowels of the ship, Sergeant Hawkins and his team crept through the maze of twisting passages, the air thick with the stench of ozone and scorched chitin. The deck shuddered beneath their feet, the distant booms of explosions echoing through the bulkheads. "Engine room should be just ahead," Hawkins muttered, consulting the schematics on his heads-up display. "Stay sharp, people. No telling what kind of ugly the bugs have waiting for us." They stacked up beside the massive blast doors, weapons at the ready. Hawkins nodded to his demolitions expert, a wiry man named Chen. Chen slapped a breaching charge against the doors, his face grim. "Fire in the hole," he said, and thumbed the detonator. The doors vanished in a blaze of light and fury, shrapnel scything through the air. Hawkins and his team stormed through the breach, ready for anything. But what awaited them defied belief. A hulking monstrosity loomed out of the smoke and ruin, its body a grotesque fusion of flesh and metal. Muscles bulged beneath armored plates, each one bristling with spines and barbs. In its claws, it clutched a massive plasma cannon, the barrel glowing with deadly heat. "Open fire!" Hawkins bellowed, and the chamber exploded with the roar of human guns. Armor-piercing rounds pinged off the behemoth's hide, leaving pockmarks and dents. It swung its cannon around with frightening speed, a searing lance of plasma vaporizing two Marines where they stood. Hawkins and his team scattered, seeking what little cover they could find amidst the twisted wreckage of the engine room. They poured fire into the behemoth, aiming for joints and weak points, trying to find a chink in its armored carapace. The behemoth advanced, its steps shaking the deck, its cannons spitting death. Marines fell screaming, their bodies flash-boiled inside their armor. But Hawkins and the survivors held their ground, their faces grim, their eyes hard with desperate resolve. "Concentrate fire on the cannon," Hawkins roared, priming a plasma grenade. "Chen, Nguyen, hit it from the flanks. Keep it busy." The Marines obeyed instantly, laying down a withering hail of suppressing fire. The behemoth swung back and forth, trying to track them all at once, its movements growing sluggish and erratic. Hawkins saw his chance. He broke from cover, sprinting across the blood-slicked deck, the grenade clutched tight in his fist. The behemoth saw him coming, swinging its cannon around to face him, a snarl of rage bubbling up from its throat. But Hawkins was faster. He jinked left, then right, the plasma blasts sizzling past him, close enough to scorch his armor. He leapt, his gene-forged muscles propelling him high into the air, onto the behemoth's broad back. The beast roared in fury, trying to shake him off, but Hawkins clung tight, his fingers finding purchase in the gaps between its armored plates. He ripped a plate free, exposing pulsing, sickly flesh beneath. The behemoth screamed, a sound of rage and agony that made Hawkins's skull vibrate inside his helmet. Gritting his teeth, Hawkins jammed the grenade deep into the behemoth's flesh and leapt clear, just as the explosive detonated with a thunderous boom. Gore and shrapnel geysered into the air, and the behemoth toppled like a felled oak, its body shredded and smoking. Hawkins hit the deck hard, rolling to absorb the impact. He staggered to his feet, his armor battered and scorched, his ears ringing. Around him, his surviving Marines picked themselves up, their faces ashen beneath their visors. "Casualties?" Hawkins croaked, dreading the answer. "Chen and Nguyen are gone," one of the Marines replied, his voice thick with grief and exhaustion. "Halverson and Okafor are wounded, but stable." Hawkins nodded grimly, the weight of the fallen settling over him like a shroud. But there was no time to mourn. Not yet. They still had a mission to complete. "Set the EMP and let's get the hell out of here," he ordered, his voice hard as flint. "Talon and the others are counting on us." The Marines moved to obey, Chen's demolitions kit already in hand. But before they could reach the engine core, a shrill alarm split the air, the wail of Sele klaxons echoing through the ship. "Shit!" Hawkins spat, his gut clenching. "They know we're here. We've got to move now." In the corridors above, Talon and his team fought a desperate rearguard action, falling back toward the hangar bay, the Sele pressing them from all sides. Plasma bolts and shrapnel filled the air, Talon's armor smoking and sparking as he poured fire into the oncoming horde. "Hawkins, what's your status?" he barked into his comm, his voice ragged with exertion. "We're running out of time up here." "EMP is set," Hawkins replied, his voice crackling with static. "But we're cut off. The bugs are swarming the engine room. We'll have to fight our way out." Talon cursed under his breath, his mind racing. They couldn't abandon Hawkins and his team, but they couldn't hold out much longer either. They needed a new plan, and fast. "Fall back to the hangar," he ordered, his voice grim. "We'll regroup there and come up with a new extraction plan. Hawkins, stay alive. We're coming for you." "Roger that," Hawkins replied, his voice tight with strain. "We'll hold them off as long as we can. Hawkins out." Talon and his team fought their way back to the hangar, the Sele dogging their every step. They burst through the blast doors, weapons at the ready, only to skid to a halt in shocked disbelief. The hangar was a sea of chitin and plasma rifles, Sele warriors packed shoulder to shoulder, their weapons trained on the humans. And there, at their head, stood a towering figure, clad in an exoskeleton of advanced armor, a massive energy glaive crackling in his claws. The Sele Emperor, come to oversee the destruction of the human intruders personally. "Talon!" the Emperor hissed, his voice a rasping sibilance that made Talon's skin crawl. "I have waited a long time for this moment. You have been a thorn in my side for too long. Now, you will pay for your crimes against the Sele Empire." Talon stepped forward, his plasma blade igniting with a snap hiss. "I killed your predecessor," he snarled, his mandibles clacking with barely contained rage. "And I'll kill you too if I have to, for the sake of both our peoples." The Emperor chuckled, a sound like the skittering of 1,000 insects. "Bold words for a traitor and a coward. Let us see if you can back them up." He lunged, his glaive flashing, and Talon met him head-on, their blades clashing in a blaze of searing light. They traded blows in a furious blur, Talon's plasma blade screeching against the Emperor's armor, the Emperor's glaive slicing through Talon's shields like paper. Around them, the battle raged, Talon's team fighting for their lives against the Sele horde. Plasma bolts and shrapnel filled the air, humans and Sele falling in sprays of blood and ichor. But Talon barely noticed, his entire being focused on the duel at hand. The Emperor was fast, strong, his every move calculated and precise. His armor turned aside Talon's strikes, his glaive darting in to exploit every opening. Talon fell back, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his armor battered and scorched. The Emperor pressed his advantage, his glaive flashing in a dizzying blur, driving Talon back step by step. But Talon was a veteran warrior, and he had not come this far to fail now. He feinted left, then lunged right, his blade seeking the joint between the Emperor's helmet and breastplate. The Emperor parried, but too slow, too late. Talon's blade pierced the Emperor's armor, sinking deep into the flesh beneath. The Emperor staggered back, a scream of rage and agony tearing from his throat. Talon pressed his advantage, raining down blows, seeking to cripple, to kill. The Emperor fell to his knees, his glaive clattering to the deck. Talon raised his blade for the killing blow, his eyes hard and pitiless. And then the world went white, a searing flash of light and heat that knocked Talon off his feet. He hit the deck hard, his vision swimming, his ears ringing. Through the haze, he saw Hawkins and his team, battered and bloody, stumbling out of a maintenance hatch. In Hawkins' hand, a detonator blinked, the trigger depressed. The EMP. They had done it. The flagship was crippled, its systems fried, its crew thrown into chaos. The tide of battle turned in an instant, the Soleil falling back in disarray, their weapons and armor shorting out and failing. Talon dragged himself to his feet, his head pounding, his body aching with 1,000 cuts and bruises. Around him, his team rallied, seizing the moment, driving the Soleil back with renewed fury. "To the transport!" Talon roared, his voice raw and ragged. "We're getting out of here!" They fought their way to the waiting ship, Hawkins and his survivors bringing up the rear. They piled aboard, the hatch slamming shut behind them, the engines roaring to life. As the transport blasted free of the hangar, Talon slumped against the bulkhead, his armor slick with blood and sweat. On the view screen, the Soleil flagship dwindled, a dying behemoth, its lights flickering and fading. They had done it. Against all odds, they had struck a blow against the Soleil Empire, a blow that would be felt across the galaxy. But the cost had been high, the losses staggering. Talon looked at the faces of his team, human and Soleil alike, battered and exhausted, but alive. They had fought and bled together, forging bonds that transcended species and allegiance. And they would need those bonds in the battles to come. For the war was far from over, and the Soleil would not forget this defeat. They would come again, with new weapons, new horrors, seeking to crush the upstart humans and their traitorous allies. But for now, in this moment, they had won, and that was enough. In the aftermath of the Soleil fleet's crushing defeat at the hands of the human resistance, Talon and his strike team returned to Earth as conquering heroes. Throngs of cheering crowds packed the streets, chanting their names as they were paraded through the ruined cities in open-topped hover transports. Medals were pinned to their chests, their images splashed across news feeds from the Jovian moons to the Centauri colonies. The Earth Council even offered Talon the post of ambassador to the Soleil, a gesture of reconciliation and an olive branch to a broken empire. But Talon politely declined, his mandibles clicking in a rueful chitter. "My place is on the battlefield," he rumbled, "not in some gilded palace playing at politics." Instead, he gathered his meager possessions, boarded a battered freighter, and set course for his homeworld, a remote colony on the fringes of Soleil space. He had unfinished business there, old wrongs to right and a new future to forge for his people. But when Talon's ship dropped out of warp and entered orbit around the colony, his compound eyes widened in shock and dismay. Where once proud towers had risen, now only rubble and ruin remained. Smoke curled from the shattered stumps of buildings, the streets choked with debris and the burned-out husks of vehicles. As the ship touched down on the cracked landing pad, Talon saw huddles of ragged Soleil civilians scurrying for cover, their carapaces dull with malnutrition and neglect. His heart's clenched with a mixture of sorrow and rage. What had happened here? He soon found out. A cabal of warlords, former generals and admirals loyal to the old empress, had seized control of the colony in the chaos following the empire's collapse. They ruled with an iron fist, crushing any dissent and bleeding the colony dry to fund their grandiose dreams of reconquest. Talon knew he could not stand idly by while his people suffered. But he also knew he could not confront the warlords directly, not yet. He would have to bide his time, gather allies and resources, and strike from the shadows. And so Talon went underground, reaching out to old contacts and sympathetic factions within the colony. Slowly, painstakingly, he assembled a network of spies and saboteurs, freedom fighters willing to risk everything to throw off the warlord's yoke. They staged daring raids on supply depots, blowing up ammunition dumps and hijacking shipments of food and medicine for the starving populace. They assassinated key warlord lieutenants, sowing chaos and paranoia among their ranks. They fought a guerrilla war of attrition, bleeding the warlords by 1,000 cuts. But the warlords would not go quietly. They tightened their grip on the colony, instituting brutal crackdowns and summary executions. Talon's rebels soon found themselves hounded at every turn, driven from one bolt hole to the next. The warlords cast their nets wide, hiring mercenaries and bounty hunters from every corner of the galaxy to hunt down the rebel leadership. Chief among these was Zect, a notorious Saleh assassin known for his cunning and ruthlessness. Zect had a personal score to settle with Talon, a long-standing vendetta that had festered for years. He infiltrated the rebel network with ease, posing as a disaffected veteran eager to join the cause. Talon welcomed him warily, his instincts prickling with unease, but he could not turn away a willing fighter, not with their forces stretched so thin. It was a fatal mistake. Zect bided his time, worming his way into Talon's inner circle until the moment was ripe. Then, in a single bloody night of betrayal, he led the warlord's death squads straight to the rebel headquarters. Talon and his few remaining followers barely escaped with their lives, fighting a desperate rearguard action through the warren of twisting streets and alleyways. Blaster bolts sizzled past their heads, the stench of ozone and charred chitin choking the air. As they neared the spaceport, their only hope of escape, Talon found himself cut off and surrounded, hemmed in by a ring of warlord troops. Zect stepped from their ranks, his plasma blade glowing balefully in the gloom. "End of the line, old friend," he hissed, his mandibles quivering with anticipation. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." Talon said nothing. He met Zekt's charge head-on, his own blade sparking to life. They clashed in a blur of slashing plasma. Zekt's preternatural speed and agility matched against Talon's brute strength and battle-hardened skill. Zekt scored first blood, his blade licking out and finding a chink in Talon's armor. The wound burned like fire, the neurotoxin on the blade's edge sizzling through Talon's veins. But Talon pushed through the pain, his vision blurring, and countered with a devastating headbutt that cracked Zekt's faceplate and sent him reeling. Talon pressed his advantage, hammering Zekt with a relentless flurry of blows. The assassin gave ground, stumbling over the prone bodies of the fallen, until Talon hooked his legs out from under him and pinned him to the ground, the edge of his blade sizzling against Zekt's throat. Zekt went limp, his eyes glittering with hate. "Finish it," he spat. But Talon shook his head. "I'm not like you," he growled. "I won't kill a helpless foe." He bound Zekt to a lamppost with a length of fiber cord and left him there, a gift for the colony authorities. Then he limped to the spaceport, clutching his wound, fighting to stay conscious. He found his few remaining rebels crouched in the shadow of a rusting fuel silo, watching the spaceport gates with haunted eyes. The place was swarming with warlord troops, all bristling weapons and twitchy trigger fingers. Talon slumped against the silo, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Even if they could get to a ship, they'd be blasted to atoms before they could lift off. But to stay was to die, or worse, to be captured and tortured for the warlord's amusement. Talon closed his eyes, the weight of an impossible choice bearing down on him. Abandon his people to the mercies of the warlords and save his own skin? Or make a final, defiant stand and hope to ignite the flames of rebellion even as he was cut down? In that moment, bleeding and exhausted, Talon made the only decision he could, the only choice that would let him face himself in the mirror. He would not run. He would not abandon his people. He would fight, and he would die, so that others might live to carry on the struggle. He pushed himself upright, ignoring the white-hot lance of pain in his side, and turned to face his battered, weary comrades. "We attack," he said simply. "We hit them hard and fast, and we don't stop until we can't fight anymore. We show them the true meaning of Saleh courage, the courage to stand for something greater than ourselves." His rebels exchanged glances, mandibles quivering, compound eyes glinting in the half-light. Then, as one, they nodded, rising to their feet and readying their weapons. They would follow Talon to the end, no matter the odds, no matter the cost. Talon felt a fierce swell of pride and love for these warriors, his brothers and sisters in arms. He activated his plasma blade, the azure glow casting his battered features in stark relief. "For the colony," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "For the future." And with that, he led his rebel band in a final glorious charge against the warlord's legions, bellowing their defiance into the waiting guns. Talon's face was grim, his mandibles set in a determined line. He knew what he had to do. The warlords would never stop hunting him, never stop terrorizing the colony unless he gave them what they wanted. and what they wanted was him. He gathered his few remaining rebels, those who had survived the desperate battle in the streets. "My friends," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "you have fought bravely, but this is a fight we cannot win. Not here, not now. You must go, take what ships you can, and carry on the struggle elsewhere. I will stay behind and face the warlords myself." The rebels protested, their voices rising in a clamor of anger and disbelief. But Talon silenced them with a raised claw. "This is the only way. If I surrender myself, the warlords will spare the colony, and you will live to fight another day. Now go, before it's too late." Reluctantly, with tears in their eyes and curses on their lips, the rebels obeyed. They melted away into the shadows, making their way to the spaceport and the promise of escape. Talon watched them go, his heart heavy with sorrow and pride. Then, steeling himself, he strode out into the open, into the glare of the warlord's spotlights. He raised his claws high in surrender, his armor scorched and dented, his body battered but unbroken. The warlord's troops surrounded him in a ring of bristling weapons and chitin. They dragged him before their leader, Kravox, who lounged on a throne of jagged metal and shattered stone. The warlord was a monster, half flesh and half machine, his body a grotesque fusion of cybernetics and twisted flesh. "Talon," Kravox rasped, his voice the grating of metal on bone. "You have been a thorn in my side for too long, but now, at last, you are mine." Talon met the warlord's gaze unflinchingly, his compound eyes hard and bright. "I surrender to you, Kravox. Spare the colony and its people, and I am yours. My life for theirs." Kravox laughed, a sound like grinding gears. "You misunderstand, Talon. I already have the colony. What I want is you, on your knees, swearing loyalty to me and my cause. Do this, and perhaps I will be merciful." Talon's claws clenched, his mandibles quivering with barely contained rage. "I will never kneel to you, Kravox. You are a tyrant and a murderer, and I will fight you to my last breath." Kravox's optics flashed with crimson light, his metal claws flexing with the promise of violence. "Then you will die, Talon. But not before you suffer, as an example to all who would defy me." He gestured to his warriors, his voice a sibilant hiss. "Break him!" The warriors fell upon Talon in a rush of clashing chitin and slashing claws. He met them head-on, his body a whirlwind of desperate motion. He dodged and wove, striking out with fists and feet, using the warrior's own momentum against them. One fell to a crushing blow to the throat, another to a knee driven into his groin. Talon seized a plasma blade from a fallen foe, the weapon humming to life in his grip. He became a dervish of slashing energy, the blade scything through armor and flesh alike. But there were too many, their numbers endless, their fury relentless. For every warrior Talon struck down, two more took their place. They bore him down by sheer weight, their blows raining upon him from every angle. His armor cracked and shattered, his flesh bruised and bleeding. He fought on, even as his strength ebbed and his vision blurred. But in the end, it was not enough. A blow to the back of his legs brought him to his knees. A strike to his sword arm sent the plasma blade spinning from his grasp. And then Kravox was there, looming over him, his cybernetic fist crackling with energy. The blow took Talon full in the face, the force of it slamming him back against the shattered concrete. He felt something break inside him, a white-hot lance of agony that drove the breath from his lungs. He lay there, gasping and broken, as Kravox stood over him, a cruel smile twisting his metal-sheathed visage. "And now, Talon, you will learn the price of defiance. I will make your death a slow and painful one, and I will broadcast it to every corner of the colony, so that all may witness your suffering and despair." He raised his fist for the killing blow, the metal gleaming with the promise of annihilation. Talon braced himself for the end, his eyes squeezing shut, his mind filled with the faces of those he had failed, those he had left behind. But the blow never fell. Instead, a thunderous explosion rocked the compound, throwing Kravox and his warriors off their feet. Talon's eyes snapped open, his breath catching in his throat. High above, a fleet of ships was descending through the smoke-streaked sky, their hulls glinting with the fire of 1,000 suns. At their head was a sleek, silver craft, its lines as clean and deadly as a scalpel. The ships opened fire, their weapons spitting tongues of searing light. The warlords' defenses crumbled under the onslaught, their warriors scattering like leaves before a hurricane. And then, from the silver ship, a figure emerged, wreathed in the bright nimbus of an atmospheric drop pod. It fell to earth like a shooting star, the impact of its landing shaking the very ground. The pod's hatch hissed open, and out stepped Captain Mei Xiang, her battle armor gleaming, her eyes hard and bright with the light of righteous fury. At her back came a host of human and Soleil warriors, their weapons raised, their voices raised in a battle cry that shook the heavens. Talon staggered to his feet, his broken body screaming in protest, but his heart soared with a fierce, wild joy, and his eyes blazed with the fire of renewed hope. He snatched up a fallen plasma blade and charged into the fray, his voice rising to join the chorus of the liberators. The battle for the future had begun, and he would fight it to the last, for the sake of all he held dear. The sky above the warlord's compound erupted in fire and thunder as Captain Xiang's rebel fleet tore through the clouds, disgorging swarms of dropships and fighter craft. Plasma bolts and missiles rained down on the warlord's defenses, blasting gun emplacements and fortifications into rubble. Talon charged through the chaos, his plasma sword flashing as it clove through chitin and bone. A trio of Soleil warriors lunged at him, plasma rifles blazing, but he leapt and spun, his blade slicing them apart in a spray of ichor. All around him, rebel troops stormed the compound, human and Soleil fighting side by side, their weapons chewing through the warlord's ranks. A thunderous roar split the air, and Talon whirled to see Kravox lumbering towards him, the warlord's armored bulk bristling with weapons. Kravox's hammer whirled and crackled with energy as he hefted it high. "Traitor!" Kravox bellowed, his voice booming from his helmet speakers. "I'll crush you and your pitiful rebellion into dust." Talon met his charge head-on, plasma sword clashing against hammer in a blinding flare of energy. They traded blows in a furious blur, sparks cascading from their armor as they smashed and slashed at each other. Kravox's hammer slammed into Talon's chest, sending him flying back to crash into a wall. Talon staggered upright, his armor dented and sparking. With a snarl of rage, he hurled himself back at Kravox, his blade scything and slashing. Slowly, inexorably, he drove the warlord back, hammering at his defenses with relentless fury. Kravox's armor began to crack and shatter under the onslaught, his shielding flickering and failing. With a final, desperate roar, Kravox triggered a device on his belt. A blast of searing light and sound erupted from him, hurling Talon back like a rag doll. He slammed into the ground, his armor fracturing, pain lancing through his body. Kravox loomed over him, hammer raised for the killing blow, his eyes alight with triumph and malice. But before he could strike, a plasma bolt punched through his chest in a spray of fire and molten metal. Talon looked up to see Captain Xiang standing there, her rifle aimed squarely at Kravox's heart. She reached down and hauled Talon to his feet, her face grim. Together, they advanced on Kravox, weapons leveled. The warlord staggered back, trying to rally his crumbling forces, but it was too late. The rebels poured into the compound from all sides, overwhelming the last pockets of resistance. Kravox snarled in fury and despair, his empire collapsing around him. With a final curse, he triggered his armor's self-destruct, intent on taking Talon and Xiang with him. But Talon was faster. His blade flashed out, slicing through Kravox's neck in a spray of blood and sparks. The warlord's head tumbled from his shoulders and his body crashed to the ground, the detonation sequence dying with him. Talon and Xiang stood amidst the smoking ruins, their armor scorched and rent, but their eyes alight with the fierce joy of victory. The compound lay shattered around them. The warlord's reign of terror ended at last. But even as the sun rose over the liberated colony, Talon knew their fight was far from over. More battles lay ahead, more tyrants to overthrow, before the galaxy could be truly free. But for now, they would rest and remember the fallen, and gather their strength for the struggles to come. In the weeks following the liberation of the colony, Talon and Xiang worked tirelessly to rebuild what the warlords had destroyed. They oversaw the distribution of food and medical supplies, the repair of shattered buildings and infrastructure. Talon coordinated teams of human and Sealay engineers to restore power and water, while Xiang organized patrols to maintain order and security. Together, they helped establish a new provisional government, a council of both species to guide the colony into a new era of peace and cooperation. Talon stood before the gathered crowds, his voice ringing with conviction. The tyranny of the warlords is ended, but our work has only begun. We must build a new society, one founded on justice, equality, and mutual respect. It will not be easy, but together we can create a future brighter than any we have known. The colonists cheered, their voices rising in a chorus of hope and determination. For the first time in generations, they dared to dream of a life free from fear and oppression. But even as the colony began to heal, Talon knew their respite would be short-lived. Disturbing reports trickled in from the rebel intelligence network. A new threat was gathering on the fringes of Sealay space, a warlord faction even more powerful and ruthless than those they had just defeated. These warlords, led by a monstrous figure known as Zarthax the Devourer, commanded vast armadas and legions of gene-forged abominations. They had rallied the last remnants of the old Imperial Guard to their banner, and now they sought to crush the rebellion and restore the Sealay Empire to its former cruel glory. Talon pored over the intelligence reports, his expression grim. Zarthax's forces were already on the move, conquering and enslaving entire worlds with impunity. If left unchecked, it would only be a matter of time before they reached the colony and undid everything they had fought so hard to achieve. He knew what he had to do. The rebellion needed to strike first, to take the fight to the enemy before they could muster their full strength. It would be a desperate gambit, but the alternative was unthinkable. Talon gathered his most trusted comrades, Xiang, the human warrior whose courage and skill had saved his life a dozen times over, and a hand-picked team of rebels, each one a veteran of 100 battles. They boarded a heavily armed cruiser, the Retribution, and set course for the heart of Zarthax's domain. As they neared the warlord's stronghold, they found themselves surrounded by an armada of Sealay warships, a bristling wall of guns and armor that stretched as far as the eye could see. The rebels were outgunned and outmatched, but they did not falter. Talon took the helm, his eyes hard with determination. "Punch us a hole through that blockade. We're going in, no matter the cost." The Retribution surged forward, its engines flaring white-hot. Sealay fighters swarmed around them like angry hornets, their plasma cannons stitching lines of fire across the rebel ship's shields. Talon jinked and juked, rolling the cruiser through a dizzying series of evasive maneuvers. Xiang manned the guns, her fingers flying over the controls as she returned fire with pinpoint accuracy. The rebels fought with the desperate fury of cornered beasts, pouring everything they had into the attack. Slowly, painfully, they carved a path through the enemy fleet, their hull scorched and pitted with weapon impacts. Consoles sparked and overloaded, bulkheads buckled and groaned, but still they pressed on. At last, they punched through the final line of defense and descended towards the planet's surface, trailing smoke and debris. The Retribution came in hard and fast, skimming over a blasted landscape of jagged rock and churning magma fields. Ahead, the warlord's stronghold loomed like a cancerous growth, a vast, fortified compound bristling with enough firepower to level a city. Talon brought the ship down in a controlled crash, skidding to a halt on the edge of a yawning chasm. The rebels leapt from the smoldering wreckage, weapons in hand, and charged towards the compound gates. They met a wall of snarling Sealay warriors, each one a gene-forged monstrosity, augmented with cruel cybernetics. The rebels crashed into their lines like a tidal wave, Talon at the fore, his plasma blade flashing in the hellish light. Xiang was at his side, her rifle barking as she put down one snarling horror after another. They fought like demons, hacking and slashing their way deeper into the compound, leaving a trail of shattered bodies in their wake. But for every foe they felled, a dozen more took their place, an endless tide of fang and claw. At last they reached the heart of the fortress, a towering throne room where Zarthax the Devourer held court. The warlord was a thing of nightmare, a monstrous fusion of meat and metal, bristling with cruel implants and whirring servo motors. He rose from his throne with a roar of challenge, his voice a deafening boom. "Foolish primates, you dare to challenge me in my own sanctum. I will flay the flesh from your bones and cast your souls into the abyss." Talon stepped forward, his blade humming with lethal energy. "Your reign of terror ends here, Zarthax. I will see your empire of cruelty burned to ashes and scattered on the solar winds." The warlord threw back his head and laughed, a sound like the grinding of metal on bone. "Bold words for a pathetic mammal. Let us see if you have the strength to back them up." He lunged at Talon, a blur of slashing talons and whirring blade limbs. The rebel leader met him head-on, his plasma sword clashing against the monster's razor-edged claws in a blaze of sparks and fire. They traded blows in a whirlwind of violence, Talon's every strike parried and countered by the warlord's lightning reflexes. Zarthax pressed the attack with relentless fury, hammering at the rebels' defenses with a storm of blows that would have shattered stone. Around them, the battle raged on, Xiang and the surviving rebels holding back the tide of Zarthax's elite guard with desperate courage. Energy bolts and shards of shrapnel filled the air, rebels and gene horrors falling in sprays of blood and hydraulic fluid. Talon felt his strength beginning to fade, his breath coming in ragged gasps within the confines of his battered armor. Zarthax sensed his weakness and redoubled his assault, raining down blows with merciless precision. The rebel leader staggered back, his sword arm trembling with exhaustion. He scanned the warlord's monstrous form, searching for any hint of weakness or vulnerability. There, a hairline fracture in the armor plating above Zarthax's cold fusion heart, a minuscule chink in his nigh invulnerable carapace. Talon knew he would only have one chance. He gathered the last of his strength and leapt forward, his blade flashing in a desperate lunge. Zarthax reacted with inhuman speed, his claws whipping up to intercept the strike. But Talon had anticipated the move. At the last instant, he twisted his wrist and sent his blade slicing in at an oblique angle. The plasma sword sheared through Zarthax's claws in a spray of sparks and plunged deep into the warlord's chest, piercing the armor and puncturing his fusion heart. Zarthax convulsed, a scream of rage and agony ripping from his synthesized vocal cords. Talon wrenched his blade free in a geyser of fluids and staggered back, watching as the monstrous warlord crashed to his knees. Zarthax's mechanical limbs spasmed and twitched, gouts of flame erupting from his ruptured frame. The warlord fixed Talon with a look of pure, unquenchable malice, his voice a grating rasp. "You think you have won, mammal? You have merely delayed the inevitable. The Soleil Empire will rise again and your kind will be crushed beneath our armored heel." Talon raised his blade for the final executioner's strike. "Not while I still draw breath. Your empire of cruelty dies with you, monster." The plasma sword flashed down, and Zarthax's head tumbled from his shoulders, a look of shock and disbelief etched on his monstrous features. The warlord's corpse crashed to the deck in a ruin of sparking cybernetics, fluids pooling around his savaged frame. Talon turned to survey the battle, his armor scorched and dented, his body pushed to the limits of his endurance. Xiang and the surviving rebels picked their way through the mounds of dead, the light of victory shining in their eyes even as they mourned the fallen. They had struck a blow against the warlords that would be felt across the galaxy, a ringing declaration that the old empire would never again rise from the ashes. But Talon knew that their work was far from done, that there would always be another tyrant, another threat to the freedom they had fought so hard to win. He sheathed his blade and gathered his comrades close, his voice rough with exhaustion and raw with emotion. "This is not the end. The Soleil remnant will not accept defeat so easily. They will regroup, rebuild, and come at us again with renewed fury. Siang nodded, her expression grim. Then we will be ready for them. We'll take the fight to the enemy, root out every last pocket of resistance until the galaxy is finally free. Talon clasped her shoulder, his eyes hard with determination. Aye, that we will. And may the gods have mercy on any who stand in our way. He strode from the throne room, his battered armor clanking with each step. There would be time to rest, to heal, to mourn the fallen and celebrate the living. But that time was not now. Now, there was only the next mission, the next battle, the next chance to strike a blow for freedom against the crumbling remnants of tyranny, and Talon would be there to lead the charge, no matter the odds, no matter the cost. For he was a warrior to the core, a champion of the rebel cause, and he would not rest until the Selay Empire was naught but a bitter memory. The fight was far from over, but with comrades like Xiang at his side and the fire of conviction burning in his heart, Talon knew that victory was only a matter of time. The years passed, and the galaxy began to heal under the watchful eye of Talon and his allies. The old wounds of war and oppression slowly faded, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of unity and purpose. Humans and Selay worked side by side to rebuild shattered worlds and forge new bonds of friendship and cooperation. But not all were content with this new order. In the shadows, a splinter group of humans plotted and schemed, their hearts filled with bitterness and resentment. They saw the Selay as a shackle holding humanity back, a weight dragging them down into mediocrity and stagnation. Their leader was a man named Zane, a former soldier with a charismatic smile and a heart as cold as the void of space. He spoke of human supremacy and the destiny of their species to rule the stars, and he found many willing to listen, many eager to take up arms and seize their birthright by force. On a dark night, Zane and his followers struck without warning. Stolen Selay ships rained fire on the unsuspecting cities of the Selay homeworld, while human infiltrators sowed chaos and death in the streets. In a matter of hours, the planet was in their hands, its people slaughtered or enslaved, its leaders dead or in chains. Talon and his allies reeled from the shock of this betrayal. They had thought Zane and his kind defeated, their ideology discredited and abandoned. But they had underestimated the depths of human hatred and the allure of power. They gathered their forces and launched a desperate counterattack, determined to retake the Selay homeworld and bring Zane to justice. They fought street by street, building by building, their weapons blazing and their hearts filled with righteous fury. At the center of the battle, Talon confronted Zane in a duel that would echo through the ages. They fought with plasma swords and energy blasters, with fists and feet and sheer, unyielding will. The very ground shook with the force of their blows, the air crackling with the energy of their clash. But as skilled and determined as Zane was, he was no match for Talon's experience and resolve. With a final, devastating strike, Talon brought the renegade to his knees, his weapon skittering away across the rubble-strewn ground. "It's over, Zane," Talon growled, his blade hovering inches from the man's throat. "Your rebellion is finished. Your followers are scattered. Surrender and face justice for your crimes." But Zane only laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Justice?" he spat. "There is no justice in this galaxy, only the strong and the weak. The Selay have made you soft, Talon. They've blinded you to the truth of the universe. Humanity must stand alone or fall forever." Talon shook his head, his eyes hard and sad. "No, Zane. It is you who are blind. Blind to the potential of cooperation, of unity. The Selay are not our enemies, but our partners in building a better future. A future where all species can thrive and prosper." Zane's face twisted in a snarl of hatred. "Then you are a fool, Talon. A traitor to your own kind, and you will die like one." He lunged forward, a hidden blade slipping from his sleeve. But Talon was ready. His sword flashed, and Zane's head tumbled from his shoulders, his body crumpling to the ground like a marionette with its strings cut. Talon stood over the fallen warlord, his chest heaving with exertion and emotion. Around him, the battle still raged, but he knew that the tide had turned. Zane's death would break the back of the rebellion, and the Seeley homeworld would be free once more. But the cost had been high. Too high. As Talon picked his way through the rubble, he saw the bodies of friends and allies, humans and Seeley alike. And there, lying broken amidst the debris, was Xiang, her lifeless eyes staring up at the smoke-filled sky. Talon fell to his knees beside her, tears streaming down his battle-scarred face. She had been more than a comrade, more than a friend. She had been a shining example of what humans and Seeley could achieve together, a living embodiment of the dream they had fought so hard to realize. And now she was gone, sacrificed on the altar of Zane's madness and hatred. Talon felt a wave of grief and despair wash over him, threatening to drag him down into the depths of sorrow and loss. But he could not afford to falter, not now, not when there was still so much work to be done, so many wounds to heal and bridges to build. He stood, his shoulders squared and his eyes hard with determination. He would honor Xiang's memory, and the memory of all those who had fallen in the name of peace and unity. He would continue to fight for the dream they had shared, no matter the cost. For he knew that the price of freedom was eternal vigilance, and he was prepared to pay it, now and forever.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.